In this week's In-Ear Insights, we are starting to take a look at the data published by Scott Brinker and the Martech conference on the Martech. It's called the Martech 9,000. 9,000 different vendors in the marketing technology space offering all these different solutions to your marketing problems. And we thought we'd take some time today to talk about just how many of these solutions there are. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up our very, very quick analysis of the top 40 categories, the number of companies in the Martech 9,000. Now, these are the top 40 categories. And the way you look at this, for example, on line one, sales automation, enablement, and intelligence, there are 508 companies that offer software to do something in that space. If you go down to line 6, CRM, there's 336 different CRM companies. So Salesforce, HubSpot, and so on and so forth. So Katie, when you see this buffet of marketing technology, what comes to mind?
It's too much. It is too much. That is the first thing I thought when we started talking about this last week is these are too many, there's too many choices for people. And what I can't wrap my head around is if there are 508 sales automation, enablement, and intelligent platforms, what's the difference between all of those things? You know, aside from they're not going to tell you the price or the features on the website, so they're going to force you to get on the phone with a sales guy to do a demo to find out within 30 seconds that you don't need this thing, that it doesn't answer any of your questions. Like, to me, this is bonkers. 9,000 different pieces of software to solve a problem. It is, to, like, as a decision maker, I sit here and I'm like, well, how do I know if what I'm currently using is the best of the best? How do I stay up to date? So if we just pick one category still has over 50 options. There is nothing on here that has less than 80 options to pick from, and it's overwhelming. So that's my takeaways. It is overwhelming, Chris.
It is. And in fact, Scott and the team have this really fantastic interactive website called Martech Map, which allows you to just get a very quick sense of what's in here. You do have to register for a free account. But let's take an example. Let's take something like public relations, our old standby from our former agency life. And what you can see is there's 82 categories, and then just, icon after icon after icon of company after company in that space. So when we look at this chart, that really is, there's 81 different companies and solutions in just that category alone. So yeah, there is definitely a lot of stuff in here.
So of course, I'm guessing that one of the questions you're going to ask, Chris, is, well, where do we start to narrow it down? And the first place you start as the person who has to narrow it down is to do your own set of business requirements, your use cases, your needs and wants, and prioritize those by must have and nice to have. So, for example, with PR, maybe I say, it must have some sort of AI built in that will, write my pitches for me. And then it also must have something that will actually do the pitching for me. Those might be must haves. And if there's nothing out there that solves that problem, well, then I have to keep moving on. Or do I have to change my own set of requirements and expectations? And so you have to do your due diligence first before you can even start poking around. I think that Scott's tool on the website, on the Martech site, is actually really handy. The problem I see with this, though, is that it can be very overwhelming and confusing if you don't have your requirements set ahead of time. Because you might be like, oh, well, I could use that too. And, oh, you know what? That would be cool. Oh, what about this? And so it's a helpful tool to understand what's in the box, but it's not helpful if you don't have your set of requirements set up ahead of time.
It is. I'm just personally amused at the number of Martech companies in here that have just PR as the logo. Like, okay, clearly there needs to be some graphic designers in the space to bring a little diversity to it. And again, the team at Chief Martech is just trying to provide a portal so people can see just a sense of the size of the landscape. It's not a vendor review site by any means. They'll point you towards a place like G2 for more apt comparisons. This is literally just here's marketing technology out there. So yeah, you're right. The user story and the requirements gathering is absolutely essential to just to make sense of how bonkers this landscape is. The thing that stands out to me is how duplicative some of this has to be. When you think about a CRM is pretty straightforward. We've had CRM technology for what, 25 years now. And the fact that there's still 336 companies in the CRM space. Now, there's obviously a lot of new startups. There's open source ones like Sugar CRM and stuff in there. There's the the traditional heavyweights like Salesforce. But yeah, 336 seems like a lot of choices. And I can't imagine that even with the best review sites, there's a way to easily put out an RFP to all 336 companies.
Well, and this is the part that I'm struggling to understand. And maybe the same could be said about us as we started our company. Why would someone willingly go into an already saturated market with what they feel is a new piece of technology? How can you, credit to the, Martech team. I don't know how or how many hours or weeks or years it takes to collect all this information. And that's, a larger team that has the resources to do so. As a startup, you may not have the resources to really understand, okay, of the 336 CRMs on the market, what's the one or two features that are missing that I can then provide to disrupt the market? Like, that's where my mind instantly goes when I see something like this of why would anyone in their right mind want to compete in this space as we sit here in our, marketing consulting agency, because we're also bonkers.
We are, but I mean, when we think about what we have to offer complementary perspectives on the space. You have that hardcore analytics and data science and AI and machine learning, but you also have the human organizational behavior, change management, and management consulting, and those are things that you normally don't see blended in consulting firms. You see them sometimes as separate divisions in a big consulting firm like a McKinsey, for example, would have that probably in separate divisions or separate teams. And in smaller consulting firms, you might just have a single point of focus. The thing that we see for ourselves is that there's those things to complement each other, and so you're better off having both rather than just having one or the other. When we think about the software side of things in these different marketing technologies, I mean, there's pricing is a huge differentiator. And probably one of the easiest to differentiate on, like, what can you afford? If you can't afford more than $300 a month, it doesn't matter how cool, a Salesforce.com is, you can't afford it. How much of the burden do you want to take on? If you are running something like Sugar CRM, you have decided that you are totally okay with administering your own servers. We are that way with Martech, marketing automation system that's open source. For $5 a month, we run a system that has some almost similar capabilities to like a HubSpot, for example, or a Marketo. But the trade-off is that you need substantial technical expertise to make the thing work. Once you've got that part down, then you can reap the savings. So it does always come back to not only requirements, but what capabilities you have and what you can use. There's a number of analytics tools when you think about it that, again, depending on your level of sophistication, dictates what you're going to use. There's tools, for example, like Adomo, that I find kind of not as helpful to me, because I have the technical expertise needed to do what I want without needing it to sort of massage everything. For a company where you didn't have somebody who had a programming background in R or Python, it might be just the thing. So it's a lot of capabilities gathering too.
And it makes me think back to, the companies that are just starting out, the startups like we were a few years ago, trying to make those decisions of what do we need to hit the ground running. And obviously that depends on the kind of company you're building, but to your point, Chris, it really is that capabilities trade-off. So let's say I were starting Trust Insights and didn't have, a Chris Penn involved. That would have drastically changed what my Martech stack looked like because of my technical capabilities versus Chris's or your technical capabilities. So, for instance, I would not have gone with a Mautic for my marketing automation because I have no desire to run my own server and to fix code every time we launch a newsletter. You, for some silly reason, enjoy doing that. And, until we run out of time for you to be able to do that, we will continue to operate that way. But at some point, it won't be sustainable. And we will have to look at, let's see, where's email on here? One of the, 100 some odd, systems that do that marketing automation to send out.
So marketing automation is 337 choices.
Oh, so no big deal. So it's an easy decision. But if I were starting out and I didn't have someone who could run their own server, that's what I would need to be doing is, I would have to say, how much money do I have to spend? How high of a priority is, marketing automation for me? What capabilities do I have? And let me start to narrow it down of the 337 choices I have presently, which, by the time, people wrap their head around the Martech 9000, it's going to be the Martech 11,000.
It's absolutely true. And I guess the question then to ask is, with a lot of these things, it almost seems like companies would benefit from having almost like bundles, right? So like for a startup with no technical expertise, here's the systems and services that are probably going to be a good fit for you. For a mid-sized company, here's the systems and services that are probably going to be a good fit for you. For an enterprise, here's the systems and services. Because, for example, like access control lists and granular access control, you need that in an enterprise. You don't need that in a 3-person consulting company, right? Because in a 3-person consulting company, if you have access control issues, then something's gone really wrong in your partnership. Whereas, half of our Martech is like Google Sheets, because that's where we are in an organizational management perspective. So a lot of those things, I think, would probably have some benefit. Now, if we look at also the technologies that the top 40 most used, we do see some commonalities. So you see here, Google Analytics, 8,000 different uses. So this is so what we did with this was, instead of looking at the Martech map of products, we said, let's take all 9,000 companies by their domain name and see what common marketing technologies they're using. So this is sort of the Martech of the Martech companies. So what we see is, out of the 9,000 companies in the Martech map, 8,000 of them use Google Analytics, right? That is an overwhelming vote of, I guess, confidence in the technology. Even with everything going on with Google Analytics 4, it's still the most popular marketing technology within this cohort. And we did this, gosh, I want to say a couple of months ago for the Fortune 1000. And even in the Fortune 1000, Google Analytics still the most popular marketing technology. And so what we see here is that even for a lot of these advanced companies, they're all still using really a dozen or so very, very common applications. And so from a skills perspective and from a jobs perspective and a hiring perspective, these are the technologies that you want to make sure if you're a marketing technologist. And if you're a marketer who's running a company or a division of a company, these are the skills that you're probably going to want to hire for.
What's interesting to me, and this is sort of what you were just talking about, Chris, was the different packages based on how big the company is that you're starting, or even if you currently work at one. And so to me, I know off the top of my head, the first dozen or so of these products are not on the gonna break the bank end of the spectrum. There's definitely a couple in there, but the larger systems like a Salesforce does offer different tiers, and so it is interesting to me, but not surprising, that the products that are used, the systems that are used the most, are on the less expensive side of the spectrum. I mean, it makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. Google Analytics, unless you're using Google Analytics 360, it doesn't cost you anything. It costs you time and expertise, but it doesn't hit your bottom line in terms of an expense. The same with Tag Manager, the same with Google Apps. Facebook Advertiser is an interesting one, because we know from working from doing work ourselves, but also with our partners, the cost of Facebook ads is really low compared to other advertising systems. Now, the quality of the information you get back is going to be different, and it's sort of you get what you pay for. But again, it's an affordable way to drive awareness. And then you continue to go down the list, and the affordability of each of these things starts to change. But it is interesting to see, where people go first, what they trust the most.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say let's run down the list here in terms of cost, right? So Google Analytics and Tag Manager free, Google Apps is relatively inexpensive, WordPress is free, Salesforce can get expensive, Facebook advertisers pay as you go, Cloudflare starts at free, Route 53 is an Amazon service for DNS, and that is pay as you go. AppNexus is a programmatic advertising company, so that's pay as you go. Nginx is a web server, and that one, I don't remember what Nginx's costs are, but it does have a cost. I don't think it's a ton. HubSpot starts low cost and then becomes reassuringly expensive very quickly. Recaptcha is freemium. I believe there's basic, and then it goes up. Office 365 is like $100 a year per person. Piwik is now called Matomo, and that is a Google Analytics alternative. It's open source, so that can be relatively low cost. Like we pay, I think $5 a month for it. Apache is a web server. That one is free. The software itself is free. YouTube is free. Exchange is email, which is part of Exchange server. That one can get expensive. Facebook Connect is free. Outlook.com is free. Hotjar is, they have a freemium model. But yeah, a lot of these, you're right. This, when you think about it, this is almost like the blueprint for a tech startup. Like these are the companies that, as a tech startup, you would want to probably have in your pocket.
Well, and this tells you, I know that these are the systems that are using this technology, but the likelihood that other marketers, other companies are also using all of this technology is pretty high. It makes sense.
Oh, definitely. It makes a lot of sense. And it's really what we see, across the board. When you look at Series B funded companies, the top technologies, we did that research. Same kit. Tag Manager, Analytics, Google Apps, Route 53, WordPress, Salesforce, and so on and so forth. It's these are different startups, but it's still all essentially the startup blueprint. So one of the things that I think is valuable about these types of analyses is if you have a known set of companies that are peers to you, you can use this type of data to understand, almost what the hiring pool is going to be like, because you know what the most common marketing technologies are. And so if you're like, this is literally a startup toolkit right here. If you are a startup, you're going to be using Tag Manager, Google Analytics, maybe Route 53, WordPress, almost certainly, Cloudflare, almost certainly. If you're not using those services, I have questions for you. And then from there, you can look at analyses of different companies up the food chain until you get to enterprises and say, okay, well, what do enterprises use? And that, again, would dictate some of your hiring.
Well, and, so to go back to the original question of, why do we need all these different technologies? Well, the answer, Chris, is pretty clear, is that you don't necessarily need to, wade through all of the different technologies. The folks over at Martech have done that for you. And again, bless them for doing all of that research. It's a lot of research, 9,000 different systems to understand, every square inch of those systems and what they do. They've done that work for you. And when you start to look at the top used technologies, then, okay, in terms of, website tracking systems, well, Google Analytics seems to be the standard. What should I build my website on? Well, it looks like WordPress seems to be the standard. Now, you still should evaluate whether or not those are the right options for you, but it definitely starts to narrow down that list and make it a heck of a lot less overwhelming.
And I think that's a really interesting point, because on the one hand, if you build with the most common tools, hiring, internally, or hiring an agency, asking an agency, hey, do you have experience with Google Analytics and Salesforce, is probably not going to be a heavy lift, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas if you have somebody asking for, say, Adobe Analytics, right? Or something like Zendesk or something. It might be a little bit harder to find. Someone who has Matomo and Mautic experience might be a little bit harder to find. But the flip side of that coin is, do those lesser known marketing technologies offer some kind of competitive advantage that the mainstream ones might not? Are they in some way better, that just hasn't caught on yet, and that could give you an advantage, but at the trade-off of it being very hard to hire people for them?
It's funny you say that, Chris, because I was actually going to, make the opposite point, is that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you have in your tech stack. It's what you do with the information you get out of it. So whether or not you're using Matomo or Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics kind of doesn't matter, because if you don't have the skill set to make the data actionable and pull out those insights, it doesn't matter what system you're using. And so it really needs to be based around what, to your point, Chris, what capabilities do I have, not just to stand up the technology, but to do something with it. So the way that I look at that is, I don't see using one system or another necessarily as a competitive advantage if you don't have anyone to do something with the information. That's your competitive advantage.
Yeah. So essentially, this is the appliance aisle at Home Depot, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can have 336 different types of stove, but if you can't cook, then it doesn't matter what stove you get.
Yeah. If you install, a chef quality kitchen in your house, but you still can't boil water, it doesn't matter. It's not going to do it for you. It might at that price, but then you're just going to have really hot water.
So given that backdrop, then how do you decide which vendor to go with, right? Because one of the vulnerabilities there then is, the big one is the people you have on staff, what they are comfortable working with, and what they can get results out of. If that's the case, how do you make a good choice for now that also allows you to grow? Because it may turn out, for example, with we'll use Mautic as an example. If I decide I'm going to become, live in the backcountry and become a counter revolutionary,
could happen.
At that,
It could happen.
It could happen. At that point, what we could do as a company with Mautic would be different, because we wouldn't have access to those skills. I'd be, on the grid once a month when I'm not, trapping raccoons or whatever. If you are a company, say like our last agency that we worked at, we provided a lot of the marketing technology expertise internally, and when we left, a lot of things immediately broke. How do you plan for situations like that?
This is where I would bust out my 5 Ps of change management, because what you're talking about is change management. So I would start with my purpose, then people, process, platform, and performance. I would do this a couple of ways. So I would do it for where I am today, what I have, without changing anything, without hiring, without, having to train up on new skill sets. So here's the current state. So what do I have? What is my purpose? My purpose is, I need to get a newsletter out the door. Who are the people? Well, I just happen to have someone on my team who can run their own server and troubleshoot code. Great. What is the process? Well, we want to aim to run this newsletter once a week. So it has to be written and then it has to get out there. What's the platform? Well, we can use Mautic for this because we have someone on the team who can do it. And then we have the performance, which is the email getting delivered? Are people opening it? So on and so forth. So that would be my analysis of the right now. And then I can start thinking of my, 1, 3, 5, and 10-year goals of where I want to be. So if I know that Chris's goal is to pull back from his responsibilities of running Mautic and have something more automated, then I can say in 1 year, these are the way that the 5 Ps need to change. That my purpose needs to be, I still need to send out a newsletter. Great. Who are the people? This is where I'm probably going to spend the most of my time, because it's a skills piece. It's the experience. It's the capabilities. And so here's what I have right now. Here's what I'm going to need in order to allow Chris to step back. So I either need to replace Chris's role with someone who has identical skill sets, or is it an opportunity to introduce a new kind of a system? And so you continue to go through that 5P analysis process, and you start to build out, like, here's where I am right now. Here's where I want to be, 5 years from now. And in the middle, what's happening? And that's where you start to build that roadmap of, we need to build up the skills. We need to evaluate vendors. We need to reevaluate what our KPIs are. Do I care more about having a larger list, or do I care more about my open rate? And so, one KPI might dictate the kind of software that I choose to implement.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, I've seen people ditch marketing automation systems in favor of a simpler email marketing system, because, like, yeah, we don't use all this other stuff. It costs us money. It's overly complex, and all we want to do is send out an email newsletter. And that's part of the reason why the Martech 9000 is as crazy as it is. There are a lot of individual point solutions in there, and a lot of the time those point solutions can find favor when you just want to do one thing really well, and you don't have the team or the skills to be able to do everything. And frankly, you don't need it. For example, you don't need the workflow management stuff and approval processes or drip campaigns. And you're like, we barely have time to send out our newsletter as it is, as an example. So I think that's again part of the Martech evaluation process, is figuring out what's the minimum that we want to get done, and are we better off with a point solution that lets us do one thing really well, or are we better off with a Swiss Army knife, which is you can kind of do a bunch of things sort of half-assed.
Well, and I think that goes, into your roadmap planning for your Martech stack and what you want, your company to be able to do and provide. And so, to your point, Chris, you start with, here's where I am today. Here's the minimum that I need in order to achieve my goals. And then you can say 6 months from now, I might need to change vendors. Well, that's probably going to be a pain in the butt. So I should probably get all the bells and whistles now. Not necessarily. As long as you make that change management plan to migrate from one system to another, and you're expecting it, and you've done your due diligence, it doesn't need to be that big of a deal. So why pay all the money right now for something you're not going to be using for the next year? All those bells and whistles, quite honestly, can be a distraction. So I think at some point, we will likely upgrade from Mautic to some other kind of marketing automation system. But right now, we don't need all the bells and whistles. We just need the email to get out the door. And, Mautic, for all intents and purposes, is kind of just one step up from me literally just emailing everybody from my personal account, which, to be honest, is fine, because that's all we need right now. It's all we need. We don't need all the other things, because we don't have time to fuss with those things.
Exactly. Now, I would say the flip side of that, though, is before you go and buy another marketing technology solution, take a look at what you've already bought, because it might have the feature you were looking for, and you just didn't read the documentation, didn't know it was in there, or as in our case, you just haven't had the time to invest in learning it. But chances are, for at least for a lot of the bigger, more successful pieces of software, free or not, the feature is probably in there. I saw something the other day. Someone was selling this $89 a month service to identify top performing landing pages, and like, you can do that in Data Studio for free. You don't need to pay $89 a month for that.
And this is where the trade-off comes in. Do I want to do it myself, or do I want the system to do it for me? So yes, you can do that in Data Studio, but you have to set up the analysis yourself, versus a system that will identify the pages for you. And that comes down to that trade-off that you were talking about, Chris, about those capabilities of, do I have the technical skills, or do I just need it to be delivered to me, without me really thinking about it? And those are all the decisions that you, as the end user, have to make.
That's true. It's true. However, that said, if you do want to be able to do that yourself, we will relentlessly promote our Google Analytics 4 course. Google Analytics 4 is one of those crazy good pieces of software that is unnecessarily difficult to use and has way too many things tucked away that places it shouldn't be. But take our course and perhaps save yourself some money on buying Martech solutions you didn't need to buy. If you got comments or questions about anything in today's episode, feel free to drop by our Slack group with over 2,400 other marketers asking and answering each other's questions every day. Go to trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. And we look forward to seeing you there. And wherever it is you watch or listen to this show, if there's a channel you'd rather have it on, go to trustinsights.ai/TI podcast, and you can find it on most podcast distribution services. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon.